Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Intro to Power BI course. Coming to you virtual today in lieu of the event that was originally going to take place in New York City. Thank you all for attending. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, it looks like a fair number of people have joined at this point, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, this is the Intro to Power BI webinar that was taking place in lieu of the event that was originally planned for a dashboard in a day in New York City. Understanding that we're in a difficult time right now as a community and wanted to still present something so that those who are interested in learning more about Power BI had the opportunity to at least get this overview. And stay tuned, because at the end of the session, we'll talk about some of our plans to kind of help everybody going forward. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the webinar. My name is Jared Brown. I'm the Vice President of Data and Analytics at Tallan. Tallan is a professional services company that provides software to our customers. And just a quick view of where we are located geographically. You'll see we have clients across the country and have conducted over 4,000 projects for over 700 customers. So it's just a testament to the relationships we like to build with our customers in the community. So what we do is not just data and analytics, which you'll see represented in this list, but a variety of other technologies and solution practices that enable us to provide kind of end-to-end support for those that we are engaged with. We are also a Microsoft partner with 9 gold competencies now. The partnership that we have with Microsoft allows us early access to a lot of features, and also the ability to conduct sessions like these using the materials that Microsoft helps provide. Okay, so let's kind of get right into it. I'm going to start with a little bit of a background about BI in general, and then talk about the history of Power BI before we move into some demos. Okay, in terms of the evolution of BI, it's posed a number of challenges over the years because, as many of us are familiar, in the early days of BI, it usually started with a business need, at which point they would engage the IT organization, express a series of requirements, and the IT group would go away, potentially build a data warehouse or start to put the reports together. Took a long time, and by the time the IT group came back, chances are the requirements may have changed, and or things weren't quite right and required kind of lengthy iterations to achieve the ultimate goal. This resulted in a second wave of BI where analysts were kind of engaged to, in a sense, take matters into their own hands, right? People were using Excel and Access databases, trying to get their hands on the data so that they can manipulate it in a way that would allow very quick turnaround in terms of decision-making process and analytics of the information. The problem is it resulted in kind of a disconnect between the business and the IT, and sometimes the numbers didn't match across groups, or a sprawl was created of these Access databases that resulted in a lot of overhead to kind of maintain. that's where Microsoft saw the opportunity to kind of move into this third wave of BI, where everybody is engaged. Um, it provides the flexibility to do rapid prototyping up front, but also provides a kind of a rich path to enterprise governance, where those quick insights could be then incorporated back into the larger organizational repository for sharing across the organization. So wanting to deliver on that vision, Microsoft figured the goal would need, they would need to start with the end user needs. And to kind of go through what those needs were, they identified 6 primary areas. The first is access to data. There was a need to be able to pull information in from disparate source systems. We're in a kind of an age where, data from your ERP system or CRM system alone aren't enough. You want to supplement that with marketing data and other more tactical sources. As many people know, the quality of the data has been a factor. So there needed to be a mechanism to kind of clean, manipulate, and sanitize some of the information as it's coming in. Then, since we're pulling data from a multiple varieties of sources and formats, there needed to be an ability to mash it up. So to take IDs from one source, match them with others, join on names, and create a kind of a comprehensive model. Once you do all this, users need to be able to explore the data. So drill down, slice, dice, find insights or trends that wouldn't otherwise be obvious. Once those insights are found, the goal is to visualize them in a way that they could be presented back to the business or end users. And this could be in a very ad hoc slice and dice kind of reporting interface, or it could be in a more storytelling fashion where a user would kind of be led through a series of pages that are leading to some kind of conclusion. And obviously, once those visuals are created, they need to be shared across the organization or with the specific end users, so that those insights can be observed and acted on. So it's this process that then would repeat over and over again that allows organizations to scale. Okay. All right. So how does Power BI do this? I'm going to go through a series of slides that talk about some of the capabilities and the different roles that that would be users of Power BI, and then we're going to come back and do a demonstration for each of them. All right, so the first thing to talk about is access to data. Power BI has a variety of connectors that lets you connect to all kinds of data. This could be data from Excel files and CSV files like we'll see today. It could be from databases, whether they're in the cloud or on-premise. It could be online services such as Salesforce or Dynamics or Marketo, just to name a few. But the list kind of goes on and on. At present, there's over 125 connectors, I believe. And I'm going to just show visually the list as of yesterday. You'll see the different groups that I mentioned just now represented here. So there's access to files of different varieties. You can connect to data sets that have already been shared in the Power Platform, Power BI being one of the components of that platform. There's databases that you could connect to, and it's not just limited to the Microsoft stack. Notice you have Oracle, you have Redshift, and a whole bunch of other third-party database implementations. Of course, there's seamless integration with all of the repositories in the Azure cloud, which is Microsoft's cloud. But it doesn't stop there. Then there's tons of online services that you could connect to. I mentioned a few of them: Salesforce, Google Analytics, and so on. And then there's also connectors that fall into the other category. So you could connect to REST APIs. You could scrape data from web pages. The list kind of goes on. And the nice thing too is if there isn't a connector, you can extract the data from that source system and consume it as a file. There's support for generic ODBC connections, and it's even possible to create your own connectors. Okay, so now that you've collected your data and started to, you want to start to prepare it and combine it, right? So Power BI, for those that don't know, has its kind of roots in Excel, and the user interface for manipulating the data is very familiar to most users. Very drag and drop kind of point and click in terms of the steps that you could take to do those transformations. But there's also a really powerful language behind the scenes that lets you do some more complex operations, if need be. Once you've prepared and kind of manipulated your data and created a model to connect to, Power BI gives you the ability to explore your data, and that could be through the use of drill down capabilities on visualizations. You could start at a year level and go down to a quarter or month. You can filter your data or slice it using some of the built-in visuals. Power BI is meant to be kind of an ad hoc exploratory reporting platform. So when you click on one visual, other visuals on the page cross-filter and highlight. And more, Microsoft is incorporating AI type capabilities into the platform. So, just with a click, you can ask for quick insights, and Power BI looks for correlations, outliers, trends in the data. A feature that's been around for a couple of years, but has taken some really large strides in recent months, is the Q&A feature, which is the ability to ask natural language questions about your data and get visual answers. Okay, so after you kind of do that exploration, you want to present your data in a form that your end users will understand and that will provide the answers to the questions that they're looking for. Power BI has a couple dozen out-of-the-box visualizations, but there's a huge community of custom visuals, some created by Microsoft, some created by third parties, that you can pull in with just a couple clicks to really find the visual that best represents the story you're trying to tell. If visuals don't exist that you think would really make your report tell that story, it's possible to create your own visuals. Tallan noticed an absence of a calendar visual, so I guess 5 years ago now we actually created Calendar by Tallan, and it's for free out in the app source area that you can pull in and use in your reports. Okay, now that you've created the story you want to tell, the next step would be to share this with your colleagues. Power BI offers a number of ways to present this information to your end users, whether that's in the Power BI service, which is app.powerbi.com, or through the other channels that it's possible to share that information, such as the mobile applications, or even embedding in a corporate or public website. Okay, this slide is a little bit technical, but I wanted to kind of provide a picture of the overall layout of the Power BI platform. All right, so we start in the lower left, next to the number 1 there, with Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop is a free tool that you can install on your computer and pull in data from a variety of sources. You'll notice the green lines coming from online sources in the upper left, like Google Analytics, from cloud sources in the lower right, such as Azure SQL databases, and even from on-prem sources, like you'll see in the lower left, which include a variety of databases, Excel documents, and so on. You kind of go through the process of creating your data model, and from there, start creating visualizations on top of it. Now, we've talked about a couple different roles here, and wanted to take a moment and kind of differentiate some of them. The first step that we kind of covered was gathering data and creating that underlying data model. So that role we call the data modeler. Not to say that people can't wear multiple hats, many do, but in theory, that's one part of the process. The next part of the process is report authoring, where someone would use that data model that was created by the data modeler and start to create a story to support the business need, creating visuals, interactions, and so on. Once that step is complete, the idea is to then share it out to the end users. That's when you would publish to the Power BI service, which is pictured in number 2 in this slide. That's app.powerbi.com. It's called the Power BI service, and that's really where you're able to share with your organizational users, customers, or even the public in certain situations. Now, that's the third role, right? The ability to kind of consume or interact with this information, get insights, and make decisions. We call this like the end user or consumer role. So some of the emails that we had sent out prior to this event talk about those roles, and we're going to talk about them again at the end in terms of resources to kind of help your Power BI journey, depending on which of those roles you fill. And again, it could be multiple. It could be all three. Okay, so in this picture, we're up to step number 2, where we've published our report to the Power BI service and started sharing with our customers or organizational users. But the goal is to keep this information fresh. So Power BI does have the ability to set up a scheduled refresh, where you can define a schedule that the Power BI service will go to those various data sources that you're pulled the information in from, and get the latest data. If that data exists on-prem, it's a little bit more difficult to get there because of security reasons, of course. So Microsoft created what's called the on-prem data gateway, and that is a small program that you run inside your environment that reaches out to the Power BI service and creates a secure connection to your data. Okay, so that's the kind of background and architecture of Power BI. I'm going to jump into some demos momentarily. All right, to do that, I'm going to switch screens here, so bear with me. Okay. Thought I might have frozen for a second there, but looks like we're good. All right, and it looks like a couple questions coming in, but being answered on the fly, so that's great. I'll touch on the answer to that question, Philip, as we kind of move into Power BI Desktop too. Okay, so we're going to get started, and you'll see here I have some Windows Explorer open, and I'm going to go in and see what we're going to be working with for this demo. The goal is going to be to pull some data into Power BI Desktop, and Microsoft provided, and as of actually you'll see 2 days ago, an updated version of this lab that we're going to try to make available to folks virtually. But before I jump into actually building this report in desktop, I thought I would take the opportunity to show the end product and tell a little bit of a story about what we're creating to provide a little bit more context. So we're going to jump directly to the Power BI service and see what it's like to be an end user or consumer of the data. And then we'll go back and see how we in theory, made that happen. Now, we only have 90 minutes today, so definitely not going to be able to create the entire report that would otherwise take the larger part of a day, but it'll give us a good idea of what's involved. Okay, so if I go to app.powerbi.com, it brings me to, in this case, just a dashboard that I have in my workspace. But there's a couple different start screens you could start at if you so chose. The way that the Power BI service is laid out is you have a kind of a navigation menu on the left that may or may not be collapsed, so you can expand it here. And for the most part, the working areas are kind of broken into these groups called workspaces. And I happen to, everybody has their own workspace called My Workspace. But I'm going to go to this one that we created specifically for this class. Now, I've already loaded a data set up to this, this workspace and a report that goes along with it. And that's where we're going to start. One other point I'd like to mention is you'll see the custom branding we have here along the top for Tallan as an organization. Your companies can apply the same branding if you want. But there's a stock Power BI look and feel as well. So, okay. All right. So here is the report that we would have ultimately created at the culmination of the dashboard and end-day event. And to give a little background, Van Arsdale is a fictitious company that manufactures clothing. And what they've done is went to a third-party marketing company because they wanted to see how they're comparing to some of their competitors in terms of market share. So they bought some data, and they're using that to compare themselves to that benchmark and just kind of explore a little bit deeper some of the information that they could find about the data. So looking at the visual in the upper right, you'll see Van Arsdale we have here is this gray line at the top. Very excellent kind of growth, and you'll notice that they have about half the total market share compared to their all their other competitors, and that's also represented over here by this card that shows that they have 47 or almost 48%. And this is showing data over the last 7 years. And you'll notice in the center, we kind of have this, this map visualization that shows revenue by country, with North America being the greatest amount. But Van Arsdale is also doing business in a variety of other countries as well. So if I click on North America, you'll see all the visuals slice and dice or highlight, filter based on that selection. Just to show that again, I could click on Japan and see that the visuals over here have highlighted, whereas the visual over here has filtered to represent only Japan. Japan, you'll see, has pretty steady growth. And if I click on Australia, similarly, shading and highlighting, but you'll notice there's actually some significant growth from 2017 to 2018. The data we're using here is, clearly a little bit old, but that's okay. Say we wanted to explore a little bit more what was happening behind the scenes here that resulted in that growth. Well, I could go to the By Manufacturer tab here and pick Australia, and all the other visuals would filter, right? I can click through these different countries. But rather than doing that, in this case, I'm only interested in Australia, so I wanted to remove one step from that process. I'm just going to right click on Australia, and because I've set this up ahead of time, I can say I'd like to drill through to the manufacturer page. And when I do that, you'll notice only Australia is represented here, because Power BI knows when I did that drill through that I wanted to include the country is Australia filter. So it's just one kind of convenient way to provide a a drill through experience. Okay, so now that I've done that, we see there's a pretty substantial growth from 2017 to 2018, and it looks like a large amount of my revenue in this region is for the urban category. So chances are there's something in this category that's contributing to that significant growth. So if I click on convenience, you'll notice that was pretty flat, so that's not the one I'm looking for. If I clicked on moderation, you'll see that actually had a decline in revenue, which isn't what I was looking for. But when I click on extreme, we have this really significant growth. So I might want to explore a little bit deeper here. So what I could do is the growth started in 2017, it looks like. So I could drill into 2017 and see. It looks like there was actually a downward trend towards the end of the year. So I'm going to go back up. I could drill into 2018, and I see, Q1 started a little high, and then it started growing a little bit more towards Q4. But I really couldn't see what happened between Q4 and Q1 because of they're in different years. Another type of drill down that Power BI gives you is the ability to expand expand one level down in the hierarchy. So rather than going down, expanding down for 2013 to 2018, let's limit this to just 4 years. Oops, hit the wrong button there. 4 years, and it's only showing 3 because remember we're a year stale here. And actually, let's just do 3 years. Sorry, a little less data to deal with. And then I'm going to hit this button here to expand down to the next level. And as you see, now I have Q1, 2, 3, 4 for 2017, and then Q1, 2, 3, 4 for 2018. And we do see a significant growth between Q4 and Q1. So just a feature to be aware of. This drill option is something I use quite regularly. And I could go another level down to the month, and you'll see there's that spike here between December and January. Now, I could probably spend a little bit more time exploring, and I think, in the typical dashboard and a day materials, you'll go in and look at some social media data to see if there was some kind of campaign going on. But for the sake of time, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to ask a colleague of mine to do that research for me. So this is the point that I'm interested in. Oops, and I lost my extreme selection. I'm going to hold down Control and click that. And I want to ask somebody to do some research. So I'm going to say, let's add a comment here. And let's say I'll just use myself. So I'm going to say, @Jared, what caused this increase? Now, I'm sure we've all been in this position where somebody said, hey, what caused the increase in revenue, late last year or early this year, and no context whatsoever. It can be kind of frustrating because then you have to be like, well, do you have some more information? In this case, say I kind of go about my business and move on, right? Now, the person, in this case, Jared, that comes back to explore this, because I did just get a notification on my phone, might come to the report and say, okay, so I'm being asked to investigate this a little deeper. There's this bookmark here that was created automatically. So when I click on this, it goes back to the exact view, highlighting the visual I was looking at. You might not be able to tell, but, well, actually you could tell up here. Here's everything that was included as a filter that resulted in the view that my quote unquote boss asked me to explore. Countries, Australia, the date range, urban category and extreme segment, and the point that he actually clicked on was highlighted again. So really convenient, and I could actually respond here and answer the question. So I'm just going to delete that comment for now and move on. So that's kind of an experience that you might have with Power BI in terms of the ability to collaborate, explore, and kind of get some insights. So the next thing I'm going to do is go into what's involved in actually creating a report like this, from pulling in the data to starting to create the visualizations. Okay, so let me just see if there's any other things that I need to address here. A lot of comments. I might have to take a look at those later. Okay. So what we're going to do is open Power BI Desktop. And for those who have some familiarity with Power BI Desktop, you may have noticed if you opened it recently that the look and feel has changed completely. So if you're new to Power BI Desktop, perfect time to participate because everybody's kind of reacclimating themselves with the new ribbon, which has a very office feel. So okay, but the way that this is Power BI Desktop is set up, you have your ribbon across the top, where you could do things like get data, and there's a variety of other tabs that we'll take a look at as we kind of go through some of the materials today, but you could insert images and quite a few other options. The view that we're looking at right now is called the report canvas, or the report view. This is the report canvas. This is where we're going to eventually be building our visualizations. But on the right, we have the list of available visualizations that we're ultimately going to use. Of course, I could always import others with just a couple clicks. When we pull in the data, this is where it's going to show up. And the other views that we'll take a look at in a few minutes are the data view, which is kind of going to be a grid of data that looks kind of like Excel and lets you do a little bit of exploration. And then the model or relationship view, which is going to let us link some of the different tables we pull in together. Okay, but let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to say get data, and you'll see here you have some common data sources that you could use, Excel and text being the two that we're going to use today, but just for the sake of it, here's the, if I click more, it's going to bring up another window with all the connectors, and there's a lot. Philip, to your earlier question, this is the full list, but there's also a link on Microsoft's, or a page on Microsoft's website that lists all of them. We could probably send that as a follow-up. Okay. But we're going to start by pulling in a CSV file. Now, before I actually pull this in, let me show you what it actually looks like. So I'm coming into the US sales folder, and we have this sales CSV file that we're going to pull in, and this BI dimensions. But let's just look at the CSV first. I'm not going to open this in Excel because it's pretty huge. I'm going to open it in Notepad. Notepad++. So you see it's pretty straightforward. We have a product ID, a date column, a zip code, number of units, and then a revenue column. And this file is 4 million, a little over 4 million rows. So pretty fair amount of data. All right, so let's say text CSV, and I'm going to browse to our location here and select that file. Okay, so now what Power BI is going to do is look at the first couple hundred rows of the file it figures out that it's a comma-separated file, so you'll see it broke it into different columns here. And I could go ahead and say load if I wanted to, and it would pull all 4 million in, but I want to do a little bit of manipulation first. So in almost every circumstance, I usually select transform data. Now that opened a separate window, and you'll see the original window behind the scenes knows that I'm making some changes to the data. So it just gives me this warning. If you ever see this, there's a good chance that you forgot to apply your changes from this other window. To differentiate the two, one of the windows is called Power BI Desktop, and the other is called the Power Query Editor. So if you ever are in a situation where you're looking for something and can't find it, chances are you're in the other window. Okay, so I'm going to maximize this, and you'll see what I have here on the left is my sales table, and then a whole series of columns with some data. Now this is only based on a couple hundred rows. If I scroll down, it keeps loading more. But the idea is not to pull in all 4 million at this point, because I'm just working with a sample of the data to do some manipulation. We like in Power BI to think about who the ultimate end users are, and we want to name things in a way that are going to be intuitive to them. So I'm going to call this uppercase sales. I mean, a little slight difference, but sometimes consistency is important. These column names look pretty good. I'm ultimately going to hide the product ID, so I'm not going to worry about that. But one thing I do need to fix is the zip code. You'll see has it assumed it was a number, and very simple mistake to make because they do look like numbers, but the result is we lost our leading 0 here. So we want to fix that. So if I click on this little icon here and say text, notice it asks me if I want to add a new step or replace the current one. Well, I don't want to convert it to a number and then back to text, because then I would have already lost my leading 0. So I'm going to replace the current step, and as you could see, we have that 0 back. Okay, so this I think this file is pretty good to go at this point. I want to pull in some other data now. So back to my Windows Explorer here, I'm going to open this other file, this Excel document, and show you what data is contained herein. So the comment function, to answer a question, does not work with Power BI Desktop. It has to be in the Power BI service. Just from a quick licensing perspective, there are free versions you can use, but in order to kind of share and collaborate with other people in those workspaces, that's when you would need a pro account, which is $10 a month per person. There's discounts for government entities and nonprofits, but that's a pretty reasonable price. Okay, let's see. So here's our Excel document. You notice we have a product tab, a manufacturer tab, and a geography tab. In the product tab, you notice at the top there's this extra row that we don't really need. Now you might be tempted to fix this in Excel, but say you keep getting a new version of this periodically. You don't want to have to go in and manually remove that each time. So we're going to try to do as much of the manipulation in Power BI as we can, as tempting as it is going to be to do it in Excel. And you'll kind of understand why as we kind of move through the day, or well, I guess the next hour at this point. The other thing I'll mention too is the product table. If I highlight this table, we have a named range here. So in addition to pulling in data from sheets, we're able to pull in data from named ranges like tables, which in this case is fortunate because then it won't include that product details header row. If I look at some of the other sheets, we have a manufacturer sheet where definitely is going to need some cleanup. You'll see the data is like horizontal instead of vertical, and some extraneous text at the bottom. And the geography tab, same kind of idea. It has a couple extra rows at the top, although unfortunately in this case, this table hasn't been defined as a named range, so we can't use that, and we'll have to clean these extra rows up manually. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, we're going to say new source, and in this case, I'll click the quick link to Excel and pull that in. Very similar to the other experience. It's going to bring up this little preview area, and I could click through the different options. So here's the product sheet. Notice it has the extra product details value at the top, where if I went to the product table, it doesn't, and it has the nice column headers already identified. So we want to pull in the product table. We want to pull in the geography sheet that we're going to have to clean up, and the manufacturer sheet that we're going to have to clean up. And we'll say OK. So over on the left, you will see in a second the 3 additional queries or tables that we're going to pull in. And we're going to quickly go through these steps to clean them up. You'll potentially have an opportunity to do that in the future, but first thing I'm going to do is rename this from product table to product. And then we're going to take a quick look at this table. Okay, so what do we need to fix? The first thing I'm going to do is notice how this product column has a pipe or a vertical bar in the middle. Someone's combined our segments and our product names. So we want to break this into 2. And I could right click and go to split column. But just also to mention, all these things that I'm doing with right click are also up in the ribbon. Just whatever is more comfortable for you from a usability perspective. So I'm going to say split column by delimiter, and it guesses it's going to use a dash, but I actually know better, and I say I want to use a pipe or vertical bar. And voila, 2 columns. This first column is technically our product, so I'm going to rename that. Second column is actually our segment, so I'm going to rename that. All right, this category, notice it has a whole bunch of blanks. Someone didn't, maybe this was like a row heading or something like that. Somebody didn't take the opportunity to fill it down. So you'll see how we have mixed down to rural, down to urban. So Power BI has an option where you can just say fill down, and all it does is copies mix down over all the blanks until it hits the next value, rural, copies that down until it hits urban, etc. All right, and then the last thing we want to do with this table is adjust this price column. See how it's a mix of the currency and the retail price? We want to break that into 2. And sure, I could split based on delimiter, but I'm going to show you this other feature that Power BI has. I can come to this Add Columns ribbon and say I want to create a column from example. And what I want to ultimately do here is pull out our MSRP. And what do I want that to be? So if I scroll over here, I'm looking at the price column. I ultimately want to pull out 412.13. So I could just type that and hit enter, and Power BI goes in and infers what I meant and copies that formula all the way down. And you'll notice it did exactly what we expected. It said, let's grab the text after the delimiter, and the delimiter is a space. Now, if there was any ambiguity, I might need to do this once or twice, for a couple rows, and then it's pretty good about figuring out what you wanted to do. So I'll just hit OK. Now that I added that MSRP column, I don't need this price column anymore. So I'm just going to remove that. Now, for anybody who's familiar with Excel, you may have an immediate concern, because as you know, with Excel, when you do formulas or things like that, you can't delete the original column, because then it would break the formula. You'd first have to copy and then paste values or something along those lines. Well, the nice thing that you may not have noticed with Power BI is, as I've been making these changes, it's been recording steps along the way. So I could actually take a step back in time effectively and go all the way back, as far as I wanted, really, and see what I've changed all the way back to the beginning. Now, this is great in case I made a mistake and I want to go back and fix something, but it's also creating a series of steps that Power BI will be able to walk through when I get new data, which is very powerful. Okay, so this table looks good. I'm going to move on to manufacturer and start with a capital M. Okay, so this one needs some serious work. The first thing I want to do is get rid of these extra columns at the end. So I'm going to remove rows, remove bottom rows, and how many? 3. Okay, now we have our first column is what should be our actual columns. So we need to pivot this data. There's a couple different options for pivoting, but one that's very intuitive to understand is called transpose. It just switches the rows and columns. And as simple as that, we now have manufacturer ID, manufacturer, and logo. But in this case, Power BI didn't automatically assume it should promote that first row to the header. So I can go back to the Home tab and say, use first row as headers, and it just moves them up and everything else is good. Notice it took the liberty over here to detect data types again, now that those text headers aren't kind of influencing it anymore, and it got it right. Okay, the last tab query I want to fix is geography. Okay. All right, and same kind of situation here. I got a few extra rows at the top, so I want to remove rows from the top and remove 2, and use my first rows as headers again. And notice I'm going to have to fix my zip code again because it assumed it was a number. But otherwise, that looks pretty good. Okay. All right, so this is our US sales. We have a product table, a manufacturer table, and a geography table. But remember, we're an international company now, and we have international sales. And let's say, for example, that we have, as we onboard new countries, we get a different source of data. So we have different CSV files for each country. So if I go back to our folder here and I go to international sales, notice we have a separate file for each country here. Same exact structure as the original, with the exception of someone thought ahead and added a country column to the end to make our lives easier. Okay, so we want to pull that data in as well. But rather than pulling in each file, since all the files are the same, Power BI gives you the ability to pull in an entire folder. So we're going to say get data, and we're going to pull in a folder. And we're going to browse to that location. Okay. All right, and you notice it found all the files and says, does this look good? And we say yes, and they added this kind of convenience that it knows the files are similar, so we have the option to combine them and then transform the data, as opposed to having to do that all ourselves. So it just picks the first file and says, we're going to use this file as an example, but otherwise very similar experience to what we saw before. I'll say okay. All right, so now we have our international sales data. And notice if I click this little drop-down arrow and say load more, it'll actually run through all the files, and you'll see they're changing and let you know all the files that are represented. When I first hit this down arrow, it just said Australia. That's just because it's based on a preview, so just something to be aware of. Okay, so we have to fix this data up a little bit. Our zip code, we want to be text again. Okay, replace the current step. And we don't need this source name because we have a column called country, so I'm just going to remove that. And then I think we're good to go. Someone's already taken care of the currency issue for us here, but Okay, so I'm going to, yeah, so now we're good. So rather than having two separate tables, one called sales and international sales, we want to combine these. So what I could do is from our sales table, which notice doesn't have a country column, I could say I want to append to this query another table, and I pick international sales and say, okay. Simple as that, and now we have a country column because the other files needed that. Notice that the US ones are all blank. If I say load more again, it's going to go through the other files, and I'll have blank and all the other files as well. Okay, so we want to change all the nulls to USA. Now in the dashboard and day training materials, you'll actually add another conditional column and say if it's null, make it USA, otherwise use the country. I'm just going to take a shortcut and say replace values null with USA, just for time's sake. Okay, now we don't need our international sales table anymore. We don't need it to load because we have all that data in our sales table. So I'm just going to right click on this and say and unenable load, and it becomes italic and won't load that data twice. Okay, so otherwise I think we're good to go. I'm going to say close and apply, and this is going to load all the data. Actually, just for time's sake, let's in our sales table, let's only bring in the previous, let's say 4 years. Still going to be a fair amount of data, but it takes a couple seconds to load here. Okay, while that loads, let me take a quick look at some of these questions. You will notice after the data loads, it's going to try to detect relationships between the tables. Okay. So one question about the security of data that's being pushed to Power BI. It's a little bit of a tricky question, but there's a lot of different types of security. Like all the data is encrypted at rest, but there's a whole bunch of other things you could do from a security perspective, like row level security, so only certain people could see certain data. So happy to find some time either at the end of this if we have time, or to reconnect with some folks to answer some of those questions. And then somebody also mentioned they had a challenge loading a really large CSV with 800 columns. I'd have to take a look at the data in the columns. I mean, it doesn't seem like that much data, but might require a separate chat. Okay, so our data is loaded. On the 800 column thing, what you could do is in the query editor, delete a whole bunch of columns that you don't need initially, and then go back and undelete them, if that makes sense, as you need them. It's always good to try to keep the file small, just to keep it clean if nothing else, because chances are people don't need half the information that you're including in situations like that. Okay, so we have our tables here on the right, and just to show you that there's data in there, I'm going to go to this data tab, and so here's our geography table, here's our manufacturer table, here's our sales table, and then just to show you, now we've loaded all the data, I could drag all the way down to the end, and I don't know if you could see there, but we have 3 million records, so quite a few rows that we loaded pretty quickly. Okay, so let's just show, now that we've pulled our data in and we've completed our data modeler's role for the most part, how we could start creating some visuals. So I can just open my sales table here, and I see my revenue column. I can just drag that onto the screen, and you'll notice this little sigma or summation sign next to revenue. What that's saying is it's assuming that since this is a number, it's going to do some kind of aggregation, in this case, sum the values. So that's exactly what it did. You'll see here's our total revenue for all countries, all manufacturers. So this number is kind of meaningless by itself. But just to show what happened, when I click this little down arrow next to revenue, you'll see that it decided it was going to sum, because that's typically what we want to do with numbers. There's other things I could do if I wanted to, but this is what I want. I just want to do a little bit more manipulation to the data. So let's make this a little bit bigger. And say I wanted to show sales by category. I could just drag category on here, and there we go, urban, rural, etc. I can remove that. If I wanted to show by manufacturer, I can check that, and there's by manufacturer. And you notice it's guessing where it should put these fields. I could just as easily have said I want manufacturer to be a legend. So there's some flexibility here, but it's going to take a best guess. Or I can show by country, but oh, what happens? Looks like there's a problem here, right? So this is something you should be aware of. Anytime you drag a field or onto a visual and all the columns are exactly the same height, that's usually an indication that there's something wrong with the relationship and it can't figure out how to tie, in this case, sales to geography. So what to do? Well, let's go look at our relationship table. We'll notice that the geography table is out here kind of by itself, whereas everything else is nicely linked together, right? All right, so why is that? Well, turns out that if we try to drag, let's say, the zip code from our sales table over to geography, it's going to give us a warning and say, hey, we can't make this relationship because we need one of the two tables to have a unique value for that column. And in the US, the zip code would work in theory. However, the same zip code in other countries may exist. So really what we need is a combination of the country and zip code together to kind of make that relationship. Now, Power BI recently added a feature where I could go ahead and say, okay, make this relationship anyway. This is generally something you want to avoid unless you really know what you're doing, because it could cause some unexpected results. In this case, if we did it, we might get revenue showing up in the wrong country because of that zip code existing in many. So what we're going to do is figure out another way to link these two tables together. And one way that we could do that is create another artificial column called zip country. So I'm going to do that pretty quickly here. So I right click here and say add column. And this column I'm creating is using a language called DAX. So I want my country. And then I'm going to say, let's stick a vertical bar there just to separate them. And then I want my zip code. There we go. So I have a new column in that table called zip country. And I'm going to do the same thing in our sales table. When I go back now to this relationship view and connect them, that should work, right? Okay, so now I return to this view, and let's see, where was I? Of course I did something wrong here. All right, we'll figure that out in 1 second here. Zip country. country. Oh, gotta love it when things don't go quite the way you expect. Country and zip, country and zip. All right. All right, well, I found my country. So I don't know, I got to take a look at why exactly that value wasn't coming through. But I'll come back to that. Okay, so I mean that's just one way to do some quick fixes from a modeling perspective. And the one other thing that I'm going to show is it's important to use whenever you're presenting data. A lot of times, it's another important thing that you want to present is dates, right? So now I have a date column in my sales table. And I could show data over time, like I mentioned before, and I could drill down. But the problem is my dates in my sales table, like I may not, I mean, as much as I would love, as a retailer for that to be the case, to have a date on every single day, there may be certain days where I have no sales. And unfortunately, right now that may actually be a case. So the importance of having a separate date table comes into play here. Now, for those who aren't familiar, it's generally a good practice to create a separate date table, and it's called a date dimension. Usually, there's something that you might pull from a data warehouse that your company has defined. I just took, a quick shortcut, and I have some code here that I'm going to paste in that creates a date table on the fly, and I'll show you exactly how that works. The dashboard and day training you'll go through has some of the same capabilities, but doesn't get quite as extensive as this. And I'm happy to share this DAX for anybody who would like to see it. But let's go ahead. Notice here I have an option to say new column. I already did that. I want to create a new table. So I could actually create tables here using DAX. Generally not advisable. Usually you want to do as much of this as possible in the query editor, but in a pinch like this, it's good enough. So what this calendar auto function is doing is saying, hey, I'd like to create a date table and grab me the earliest date, the latest date, and all the data that I have in this Power BI model, and give me, a series of dates for all years contained therein. And then I want to add columns to it, so I could do things like, is this the current year? Is this a leap year? Month short. If I only want the 3-digit month name, and I'll let that get created. Okay, so you'll see over here, I have my date table with all these columns. And the one thing I have to fix in this case is it's not a date time. I want a date. Very, minor change. Okay. Now that I have that separate table, I want to make sure that I link that to my date table, my sales. Okay. Okay, so now that I've done that, let me get rid of this. And I'm going to start using the date from my date dimension instead. This table has every single date in the range, so I could start doing things like time intelligence and whatnot. So I'm going to do a quick explanation of measures. And before I do that, I'm just going to see how we have the year and quarter concatenated together. I might want to come in and modify the x-axis to not have concatenated columns. There you go. And it just breaks them into separate rows. It's a little easier to see. Okay, so now that I've done that, I would like to talk a little bit about measures. So one of the super strengths of Power BI is the ability to perform aggregations on large amounts of records, but in a way that it doesn't have to pre-calculate them. So no matter how you slice and dice the data, what filters you're looking at, it's able to apply that calculation on the fly, and you don't have to worry about, oh well, we didn't pre-aggregate at that level, so I can't show you that information, which is definitely a problem in a lot of tools. So while when we dragged revenue onto this value column, I mentioned before that it decided to do a sum. This is actually an implicit measure that it created behind the scenes for us. I, in many cases, like to create my own, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to create it first, and then I'll explain. Okay, so we want this to be called sales, and I'm just going to say this is the sum of revenue, right? Very simple. Seems very Excel-like, so people who are familiar with Excel usually pretty comfortable. And I'm going to drag that onto the visual, and voila, it's exactly the same value as the other. And then I'm going to get rid of the revenue one. And I'm going to go so far as to actually hide this so people don't accidentally use it. In fact, I'm going to hide everything in this table because people should be using all those other tables that we linked to. And this may seem like kind of a excessive use of demo time here, but I'm going to show you one nice feature. If you get to the end of a table and the only thing left in it are measures, just going to collapse this and reopen it, you'll notice that that table has a different icon now and it moved all the way up to the top. Makes it really easy for people to find those calculations, which is kind of a nice feature. Okay, so I have my sales table, and the reason I like doing measures like this is, say you have hundreds of people dropping revenue on their visuals across the company, and then all of a sudden somebody, in finance is like, yeah, but you forgot about the discounts that we apply after the fact. Now, somebody has to go back to every single one of those locations and make a change. So if you early on create calculations, this is one place I could come back in and subtract my discount, and everything else affected is automatically taken care of. So that alone is worth creating the small amount of time it takes to create those upfront measures, and that effect kind of cascades, because say I wanted to create a month-to-date calculation or a year-to-date calculation. I could write that myself, but Power BI has this thing where if I right-click, I could say new quick measure, and it gives me a list of some common calculations people do. So in this case, what do we say? Year to date. Let's go year to date, and we're going to base it on our sales calculation, and it asks for a date. Now this is where having that date table is important. Without a date table, it's not going to work because it needs a continuous list of dates, with no gaps. So I'm going to bring in my date column here and say okay. All right, so now I have sales year to date. It even took the opportunity to name it for me, and I could change it if I want. This, by the way, is a great way to learn DAX, these quick measures. It's DAX can be a little bit intimidating, and there's very few, I would say, masters of DAX, but use quick measures. Google finds patterns people are using, and then keep them all stored somewhere in a quick reference guide so you could go back to them. All right, so I'm going to drag year-to-date sales onto the list, and you could see each year it adds up, right? Just like we would expect. Now, I might instead use a different visual where I put the year-to-dates as the line or something along those lines, but just a quick way to illustrate that. Okay, so that's what I wanted to demo from a report creation perspective. Actually, one other thing, let me go ahead and do this just because we didn't show a slicer yet. I'm going to drag manufacturer onto the screen, and it gives me a list of all the manufacturers. But I only want Van Arsdale, which is our company, represented here. So I could click this visual, which turns this into a slicer. Oh, sorry, excuse me. And I could say, let's see just Van Arsdale. And all the visuals are updated to reflect that. If I didn't want to give the end users the ability to pick between these different options, I could delete this and I can add it instead as a filter. I can add it as a page filter. Let me click on this visual. I could add as a page filter, an entire report filter, or even just a visual if I wanted to. In this case, I wanted it on this page. So this page is limited to Van Arsdale. There's other options too. You could do advanced filtering options like contains or date ranges, but just to show you another way to do it. And I have the option to lock this so people can't change it once I publish. So a couple things that you have there. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. Save this to reports, and we'll call this simple report 2. And what I'd like to do next is publish it. So I'm going to hit this publish button. And there's a couple different ways you could do this. Save, yeah. And where do I want to publish it? Well, I want to publish it to 2000 Intro to Power BI. And I say, OK. And it's going to push up the data set, push up the report, and let me know when it's done. Okay, let me see what else we have for questions here. Will filters be part of the demo? I hope that quick filter explanation I just did there counts. What about setting drill through? I might be able to explain that quickly. And where would someone go to learn more about DAX? Microsoft does have some advanced training courses on DAX and Power Query, or M as it's called. So we could definitely get you in touch with some resources there. The two kind of gurus, that I've seen quite a few resources shared in the past for DAX are Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari, two Italian guys. I mean, if nothing else, they're fantastic to listen to with the accents. But Tallan also has on our staff Bill Pearson, who has created a couple of the Stairway series. So there's Stairway to DAX that you might find a valuable resource. But those are probably some of the three that I've used quite extensively. The Microsoft community has a lot of resources as well, so you can use some of those. Okay. All right, so this is published. Now we can just go there to the Power BI service, and I could have also navigated there through the other window I had open, but here's our report. So just exactly like we expected to see it. A couple of different things that we could do here. We saw comments before. You also have the option to subscribe, so I could get emails with this picture every time the data is refreshed. I can pin this visual to a dashboard. So I'm going to say, I guess I have an existing dashboard. I'm not going to create a phone view, but you could also create phone views. And on the dashboard, here's my visual. Now, clicking on this goes back to the report, but the idea with dashboards in the Power BI service is you could take a collection of visuals from reports or from natural language questions and kind of bring them all in one single pane of glass, and then use that to kind of link back to the various locations as needed. Okay, so now that we're in the Power BI service, very similar experience here. What I do want to mention is if you have permissions, you can also edit the report up here. So you don't technically need Power BI Desktop to manipulate reports. You do need it if you want to change anything about the data model. So I can't create new measures or calculated columns or bring in any other sources to this. There are certain ways to kind of achieve that, but as a general rule of thumb, that's the case. All right, so let's say I move this around, but maybe the executive wants to see year-to-date sales. Just throw this up here as a card. Okay, and well, normally I would filter this visual to the current year, but just for the sake of time, let's not, and save this. And now what we want to do is pin this to our dashboard. Okay, so yes, existing dashboard, and we could go there. So the nice thing about certain visuals, like cards, gauges, and KPIs, is there's this additional feature that's enabled called Manage Alerts. So I could say, hey, when this year-to-date sales goes below, 200,000. I mean, this isn't obviously a good case because, year-to-date sales doesn't change that often. But maybe if it gets above, maybe we want to have a party when it gets over to 25. I want a notification. I can also say send me an email, and I will get this on my phone, get this in my email. And then I could also integrate with one of the other capabilities that are part of the Power Platform called Power Automate, and I could start this whole workflow. Like it kicks off the planning committee, orders the cake. You could do some pretty fancy things with it. Okay, I'm not going to save that, but just to mention that feature exists, and I want to maybe make this one my favorite. But that's kind of just a good representation of some of the other capabilities that exist in the Power BI service. Now, you may not want everybody working in the same workspace as you have people consuming the report. Power BI also has this other concept called apps. And I'm not going to go through well, let's just do it. So I'm going to publish an app for this workspace. I'll just call it the same. I'll just leave it. That's fine. And I could say here who gets to see this. Maybe this one's the entire organization. Maybe it's specific people. But I'm going to publish it. And this is just another view of the same exact report. This one is completely read-only. So this is not an area where people can, edit what's existing. Sure, they might be able to make a copy and kind of work on it. But the idea is this is kind of the area where you would present this information to end users. That way, if you're working in the workspace and make a change, they don't reflect here immediately. You have an opportunity to publish once you're ready. One other thing that we didn't really get into is the ability to ask a question about your data. You could do this on dashboards. You could actually do this in reports in Power BI Desktop if you want. I haven't actually prepared a question, so that usually goes well. But sales by, I don't know, what do we want to go by? Manufacturer. And it already knows what I'm going to type, which is kind of nice. And starts giving me different visualizations to represent that. And maybe I don't like the bar chart. Maybe I want as a tree map. So, it kind of figures out exactly what I'm trying to do, behind the scenes. And then I could go ahead and pin this visual to oh, I'm in the I forgot, I'm in the app. If I was in the workspace, then I could pin this to my dashboard. But right now, the dashboard is read-only. So same experience in the workspace. Okay. Anybody, let's see, have any other questions that I can cover real quick? We have about 10 minutes left, it looks like. So there's the question about security trimming at a column level, and I could talk to that. And there's also a question about drill through, and I could show that. So I'm going to go to another report that I already have set up. And go back to my workspace here. Okay, so where was I? Where'd everything go? Oh, that's not fun. Well, as chance would have it, Microsoft decided to throw a little curveball there. Let's go ahead and open up one of the reports that I have on desktop, because that's where I could show some of the rollover security stuff anyway. So as far as row-level security is supported in Power BI. You could create the roles in Power BI Desktop and apply them in the Power BI service. There's even a way to test as different roles. The other thing I'll mention is it's even possible to use row-level security when you're using a direct query through to an underlying database. So there's a couple options there, but some really powerful capabilities. Column level security technically does not exist in Power BI. It does in Azure Analysis Services, but there is a way to achieve it. What I've done in the past is break that one column into a separate table, so that you have a one-to-one relationship between the two tables, and then you apply row level security to that entire separate table. So you're achieving column level security by using row level security. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and the other thing that I wanted to show is how that row level security works. So if I go to the modeling tab, I already have some roles set up in this database. You'll see that I have a Australian role who's set up to only see Australia. So what I could do is say I would like to view as the Australian role. Now, the security should be applied, and all my visuals can now not see any data related to the other countries. Now, in Power BI Desktop and in Workspaces, I have the ability to test as another user. In the app or any kind of read-only modes, that's not an option, because row-level security, you want it to kind of enforce that, because people might not be allowed to see that other data. So that's just a quick way to cover row-level security. As far as the drill through that we were looking at before, there's a couple ways to do it. I might have time to cover one here, but remember we right-clicked on Australia and then said drill through to by manufacturer. How did we do that? On the by manufacturer page, if I go there, on the by manufacturer page, you'll notice in this area, if I don't have any visuals selected, this drill through section shows up, and at the bottom, somebody's dragged country into here, right? You could drag other things into there as well. So maybe I wanted to drill through by manufacturer, so I could in theory drill through on a manufacturer ID as well. And it also gives you the ability to test. Like I could pick one of these to see what it looks like. But then anytime either of these columns are in a visual, it'll give you that option. The other thing you could do, and this one's a little bit more involved, if I wanted to, I could drill through on a measure as well. This one is even more powerful, I think, in a lot of cases, because anywhere sales data is represented, I could say I would like to drill through. Actually, let's do this. Let's pick Van Arsdale and then pick North America. Oops. And then, oh, what did I just do? I lost my drill through. Oh, I know why, because I'm not showing sales on this. I think I'm showing something else. I'm showing revenue. Well, let me drag sales in here instead. Okay, so now I should be able to right click and drill through by manufacturer. And I think I should be able to drill through by manufacturer. And notice I selected curious over there. When I come to this page, you'll see here it brought over all the filters. Even though I didn't say I wanted those ones to be available, it brought through the country, the date range, and the manufacturer. So that's even more powerful in my mind. It's just a little harder to kind of understand the implications in some cases. Okay, let's see. Got about 5 minutes left. One other question was, are there rules around ask a question? Power BI does a great job figuring out synonyms and using Bing search to the search engine to like common translations for words. But there are also tools that let you come in and see questions that were asked. And I haven't actually prepared anything here, but this will be all the questions that were asked, and I'd have to find my workspace. But it lets you review them and then teach Q&A. So you can ask questions, and then if someone says sales by vendor, you could say yes, vendor equals manufacturer, and then you kind of help it learn, which is pretty cool. Let's see. All right, I think I covered most of the questions, or perhaps Sam hit some of them, but maybe it was Gina. But let's see, just because we don't have a whole lot of time left, I want to switch back to the slideshow for a moment. Okay. And I just have to find PowerPoint again. There it is. Okay, so just a couple of additional features I wanted to mention. I mean, obviously, the idea with Power BI is to pull data from any source, whether it's cloud data or on-prem, and present it as to users in the web, on mobile apps. There's actually a way to analyze Power BI data in Excel without pulling it in as a pivot table. Some really great options. We've been doing a lot of work in embedding Power BI in websites like portals for customers to kind of get a glimpse at their data. But there's a lot more that Power BI can do, and some of the differentiators that we're going to just quickly mention are shown here. Real-time dashboards, we didn't get into this, but you can actually stream data live to a dashboard and it will update in real time. A few scenarios where that's valuable. If we really wanted to have that party, when we hit the 225 million mark. Another feature, we showed this one briefly, is ask a question, and this is getting much better as time passes. Some of the ability to learn and kind of review the questions is huge. You could even ask conversational questions from your phone, which is, so I could say sales, and then it gives me the total, and I could say by country, and it gives me a graph, kind of conversational. You could create custom visualizations. This is obviously a very sophisticated one for a turbine engine manufacturer, but if you don't see a visual that you want, don't let that be a limitation. The options are kind of limitless. It just takes a little effort. I mentioned just now the integration with Excel. So in the upper right, this is actually connecting to a Power BI data set in real time, so it doesn't pull all the data into Excel, and you could kind of pivot on the data. You could also publish data from Excel directly to the Power BI service, or even pin ranges of data to dashboards. So you don't have to always recreate everything if you already have it in Excel. There's also the Power Platform. I mentioned Power Automate before for those workflows, but Power Apps is another capability where you could create business, applications using a low-code, no-code environment and embed them directly in a report, so you could actually take action on data in Power BI. Conversely, I mentioned earlier, you could embed Power BI reports in your web application, allowing people to see data where it makes sense and then act on those insights. Overall, Microsoft is, kind of leading the way from a variety of perspectives in terms of global footprint, all these different security standards that they support. And that's been reflected over the past 13 years. They've been a leader in the Gartner quadrant. And you could see, here for 2019 and 2020, they're still up there. Overall, I just wanted to mention, we did this brief session today to give you a feel of, what's available, with Power BI. But we also wanted to let you know that we're going to be reaching out about additional training materials, so you could actually get your hands on Power BI and have a little bit of support from us too. So we haven't officially finalized this, but we're looking to do some virtual sessions in April for some of those different roles we talked about. So whether you're the data modeler, the report author, or the consumer, we were thinking perhaps we do like a 3-day series or something like that you can attend depending on your availability and interest. But in the meantime, I know this is, a very difficult time for a lot of companies. So if you have a very pressing need, feel free to reach out. We're happy to answer, a couple questions. We've been incredibly busy, but we'll do what we can to kind of get you the help that you need in the short term. So definitely appreciate you taking the time to join today. Hope you found it valuable. And we still like to hear what you thought of this event. So while this wasn't the true dyad, and some of that's going to be coming, we're still happy if you would take a look at this survey. Gina is going to actually paste the link to the direct survey for this event into the chat, or you could go to the one listed here and then search for the New York event. I probably a couple other questions I didn't answer, so we'll try to take a look at those and get back to you all. Sorry, I went 2 minutes over, but definitely appreciate your time, and everybody stay safe. Thank you.